What happens when a fairy tale wedding turns into a public nightmare? For Sophia Rossi, her life was a movie. She was about to marry Julian Croft, a charismatic millionaire, in a ceremony whispered about as the event of the year. They had the cliffside mansion, the designer dress, the love everyone envied. But at their lavish wedding rehearsal in front of their closest friends and family, Julian stood up to make a toast. It wasn't a toast to their future, but an announcement that shattered everything he was in love with someone else. And she was sitting right there. But Julian underestimated the woman he'd just humiliated. Because while he slept in the arms of his mistress, Sophia planned a counter-move that would leave everyone, especially him, speechless. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about brilliant, cold-blooded revenge. The air at l'Orangerie Beverly Hills' most exclusive dining establishment was thick with the scent of money and white roses. It was the kind of scent Sophia Rossi had grown accustomed to over the past 2 years. A fragrance as intoxicating and dizzying as her fiancé Julian Croft. Every detail of their wedding rehearsal dinner was a testament to his power. The crystal glasses that chimed with the sound of 1,000 tiny bells, the 5-course meal crafted by a celebrity chef, the quiet efficiency of the waitstaff who moved like ghosts. Sophia smoothed the silk of her ivory Tom Ford dress, a nervous flutter in her stomach. Across the long, beautifully adorned table, Julian caught her eye and gave her a smile that could melt glaciers. It was the smile that had first captured her, the one that made him look like a modern-day Gatsby, full of charm, ambition, and a hint of beautiful danger. He was the CEO of Croft Enterprises, a real estate development empire that was reshaping the Los Angeles skyline. At 35, he had the world at his feet, and he had chosen her, Sophia, an art historian, with a quiet background to share it with. "Happy, my love," he mouthed from between his parents, Caroline and Richard Croft. Sophia nodded, forcing a radiant smile. Of course she was happy. This was the dream, wasn't it? Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Julian Croft. They would move permanently into the stunning Malibu mansion he had bought for them, a cliffside architectural marvel they called Serenity House. Julian had made a grand gesture of it, placing the deed entirely in her name months ago as a pre-wedding gift. "A testament to my undying, unconditional love," he had written in the card. "This house, like my heart, is yours and yours alone forever." Her father, a retired history professor, winked at her from a few seats down. He and her mother were still slightly bewildered by the sheer scale of Julian's wealth, but they adored him because he seemed to adore their daughter. To the happy couple. Julian's best man, Michael, raised his glass. The room echoed with toasts. Laughter and conversation flowed like the vintage champagne Julian had ordered by the case. Yet a tiny, persistent splinter of unease had lodged itself in Sophia's heart over the past few weeks. Julian had been distant. More late nights at the office, his phone angled away from her hushed conversations that ended abruptly when she entered a room. He'd blamed it on a stressful merger, and she had tried to believe him. Why wouldn't she? He was building an empire for them. She watched him now, laughing with his friends. He was the sun around which everyone else orbited. But she noticed someone else at the far end of the table, someone who didn't quite fit. A striking blonde in a crimson dress that was just a little too bold for the occasion. Sophia vaguely recognized her as Amber Cole, a junior marketing associate from Julian's company. Why was she here? This was supposed to be for immediate family and the wedding party. Amber caught Sophia's gaze and held it for a fraction of a second too long, a small, knowing smirk playing on her lips. It was a look that sent a chill down Sophia's spine. It was the look of a woman who held a secret. The main course was cleared, and dessert was served. The chatter softened as Julian slowly rose from his seat, tapping a spoon against his crystal glass. A hush fell over the room. Everyone leaned in, eager to hear the groom's heartfelt words on the eve of his wedding. "Thank you all for being here." Julian began, his voice smooth and confident. He beamed, his eyes sweeping across the room before landing on Sophia. "Especially you, my beautiful Izzy." Sophia felt her cheeks flush. All her earlier anxieties seemed to melt away under the warmth of his gaze. This was real. This was her life. They say that before you make the biggest decision of your life, you should have a moment of absolute clarity. Julian continued, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly. A moment where you know with every fiber of your being that you're doing the right thing. And I've had that moment of clarity. He paused, letting the dramatic weight of his words settle. Sophia's heart swelled. She thought she knew what was coming next, a declaration of his undying love, a tribute to their future. But then Julian's eyes flickered away from her. They moved down the length of the table and locked onto the woman in the crimson dress. "My clarity," Julian said, his voice ringing with a strange new conviction, "is that honesty above all else is the greatest gift one can give. And so I have to be honest with all of you, and especially with you, Sophia." The room grew so quiet, you could hear the distant Pacific waves crashing against the shore. Sophia's smile faltered. This was not the speech she was expecting. Her father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Julian took a deep breath, a performer in his own grand play. "I cannot go through with this wedding." The words hung in the opulent air, sharp and deadly as shards of broken glass. "I cannot go through with this wedding." For a moment there was only a stunned collective silence. Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. It was as if the world had suddenly tilted on its axis, sending everything, the crystal, the roses, the smiling faces, sliding into a dark, roaring abyss. She stared at Julian, her mind refusing to process the sentence he had just uttered. It had to be a joke, a horrible, cruel, unfunny joke. But the look on his face was one of serene, almost righteous determination. He wasn't joking. Whispers erupted around the table like wildfire in dry grass. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Her father's face hardened into a mask of disbelief and fury. Julian's parents, Caroline and Richard, looked utterly horrified, their faces pale with shock. Caroline started to rise to say something, but Julian shot her a look that silenced her instantly. He was in command of this destruction. "This is not a decision I've made lightly," Julian continued, his voice resonating with a nauseating sincerity. He was framing his betrayal as a noble act. "For the past few months, I've been on a journey of self-discovery. I realized that to live a truly authentic life, I must follow my heart, no matter the consequences." He turned his gaze fully from Sophia, making her feel as if she had ceased to exist. His eyes found Amber Cole, who was now looking at him with an expression of pure, triumphant adoration. "My heart," Julian announced, his voice swelling, "is with Amber." He extended a hand, and as if on cue, Amber rose from her seat. The crimson of her dress was like a splash of blood against the pristine white and gold of the room. She walked towards him, her hips swaying with a confidence that spoke of a victory long secured. She didn't spare a single glance for Sophia. Julian took her hand, pulling her to his side. They stood together, a united front, in the wreckage they had just created. Amber has shown me what true, passionate, unbridled love looks like. We are together now, and we will be building our future together. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just breaking off the engagement. He was anointing his mistress in front of everyone at their wedding rehearsal dinner. He was publicly executing Sophia's dignity, her love, her future. Every eye in the room was now on her. They were watching her, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. They expected tears, screams, accusations. Sophia felt 1,000 emotions warring within her gut-wrenching pain, profound shock, and a searing, white-hot rage that threatened to consume her. But in that moment of supreme humiliation, something inside her shifted. A strange, icy calm washed over the inferno of her feelings. Her art historian's mind, trained to observe details and find the hidden meaning beneath the surface, took over. She saw Julian not as the man she loved, but as a hostile work of art to be analyzed, a portrait of narcissism and cruelty. She saw Amber not as a rival, but as a cheap forgery. She met Julian's gaze. He looked at her with a flicker of something pity-guilt. It didn't matter. She would not give him the satisfaction of her tears. She would not let him see her break. Slowly, deliberately, Sophia stood up. Her movements were graceful and controlled. She picked up her glass of champagne, the one that was meant to toast their future. The room fell silent again. She held the glass aloft, not in a toast, but in a final dismissive gesture. "Well, Julian," she said, her voice perfectly, even devoid of any tremor. "I must thank you." But Julian looked confused. This was not the reaction he had prepared for. "Thank you for giving me the one thing you spoke of." Sophia continued, her eyes cold as steel. "Absolute clarity." And with that, she turned not to him, but to his horrified parents. "Caroline, Richard, it has been a pleasure. Mother, father." She looked at her own shell-shocked parents, giving them a look that said, "Stay calm, follow my lead. We're leaving." She placed the untouched champagne glass back on the table with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. She didn't run. She didn't storm out. She walked head held high, her back straight as a queen, leaving a court of fools. She glided past Julian and his mistress, not even gracing them with a sideways glance. It was the most powerful statement she could make. They were beneath her notice. The walk out of l'Orangerie was the longest of her life. She could feel the stares of 50 people burning into her back, but she didn't falter. As the valet brought her car around, her father finally spoke, his voice thick with rage. "Sophia, what are you going to do?" That man, I'll kill him." Sophia slid into the driver's seat of her Mercedes, a gift from Julian she now loathed. She looked at her father, her eyes finally showing the deep, profound hurt she felt. "Killing him is too easy," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "He wants a war. He wants to destroy me. But he has no idea who he's dealing with." As she pulled away from the curb, leaving her stunned family on the sidewalk, she had only one thought in her mind. One destination. She wasn't going to her parents' house to cry. She wasn't going to a friend's for comfort. She was going to see her lawyer. Part 3. The Midnight Council. The sleek black Mercedes cut through the glittering, indifferent streets of Los Angeles. Sophia drove automatically, her knuckles white on the leather steering wheel. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red, a smear of colors that mocked the black hole that had opened up in her life. The car, the dress, the life she thought was hers. It all felt like a costume from a play that had just ended in a tragedy. She didn't drive to the Malibu cliffside mansion. The thought of Serenity House was a spike in her heart. Their home. The place where he was likely at this very moment, celebrating his new, authentic life with Amber. The thought was so vile it nearly made her physically ill. Instead, she drove to a discreet, elegant brownstone in Hancock Park. This was the home office of Eleanor Vance, one of the most feared and respected family law attorneys in California. Sophia had met her at a charity function a year ago. Eleanor was sharp, impeccably dressed, and had a reputation for surgically dismantling the egos of powerful men. Sophia had saved her number a just-in-case measure that felt foolishly paranoid at the time. Now it felt like a lifeline. It was past 11 p.m., but she called anyway. "Vance?" The voice on the other end was crisp alert. "Eleanor, it's Sophia Rossi," she said, her voice finally cracking the icy composure from the restaurant beginning to thaw. "I'm so sorry to call this late, but say no more." Eleanor's tone softened with professional empathy. "I heard. My cousin was at the dinner. Where are you?" "I'm outside your office. Your home." "Park in the driveway. I'll buzz you in." Minutes later, Sophia was sitting in a plush leather armchair, a heavy glass of scotch in her hand, the warmth of it a small anchor in the storm. Eleanor's office was a fortress of mahogany and law books, a space that exuded competence and power. Eleanor, dressed in silk pajamas and a cashmere robe, looked less like a lawyer and more like a battle-ready general. "He did it in front of everyone?" Eleanor asked, her expression a mixture of professional interest and human outrage. Sophia nodded, taking a large swallow of the scotch. She recounted the entire sordid affair, the speech, the introduction of Amber, the public coronation of his affair. She left out no humiliating detail. Eleanor listened patiently, her fingers steepled. She didn't offer platitudes or empty comforts. When Sophia was finished, she simply asked the most important question. "What do you want, Sophia?" "I want to disappear. I want to crawl into a hole and never come out." Sophia confessed the pain raw in her voice. "But I can't. I can't let him win. He didn't just break my heart, Eleanor. He tried to obliterate me. He wanted to leave me with nothing but shame. Men like Julian Croft don't just want to win. They want to annihilate," Eleanor said, her voice hardening. "They see people as assets or liabilities. The moment you became a liability, he liquidated you in the most public way possible to consolidate his new asset, the Mistress. It's a classic narcissist's power play." The cold, brutal assessment was exactly what Sophia needed. It stripped the emotion away and laid bare the mechanics of the betrayal. "So what do we have?" Eleanor switched into lawyer mode, grabbing a legal pad. "The wedding is off. The gifts will have to be returned. The vendors will need to be dealt with. The ring, he can have the ring," Sophia said with disgust. "I don't want it." "Good. We'll have it appraised and add its value to the settlement claim," Eleanor noted. "But that's all small change. We need leverage. Real leverage." "What about the house, the Malibu property?" Sophia's heart seized. "Serenity House." The name was a cruel joke now. He bought it for me." "For us?" "How was it purchased? Who is on the title?" Eleanor's eyes sharpened. This was the critical point. "He made such a show of it." Sophia recalled, her voice barely a whisper. "About 6 months ago. He said it was a pre-wedding gift, a sign of his total commitment. He had his lawyers draw up the papers." She looked up at Eleanor, a flicker of memory igniting in her mind. "He was so arrogant about it. He said something like, "This is so you know that no matter what happens, you'll always have a home with me." He insisted the deed be put solely in my name. Eleanor froze her pen, hovering over the paper. "Solely, in your name alone. Not as joint tenants." Yes, he said it was more romantic that way. Unconditional. Eleanor slowly leaned back in her chair, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. It was the smile of a shark that had just scented blood in the water. "Sophia, do you have the paperwork? The deed?" "It's in a safe deposit box at my bank, along with the card he wrote. The one where he called it an unconditional gift. Yes, it said, 'This house, like my heart, is yours and yours alone forever.'" Eleanor let out a low whistle. "Oh, Julian, you magnificent, arrogant fool." She stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the quiet, dark street. In California, a gift given in contemplation of marriage can often be revoked if the marriage doesn't happen. The classic example is the engagement ring. But real property is different, especially when it's accompanied by a written declaration of intent. She turned back to Sophia, her eyes gleaming. "He called it an unconditional gift. He put it in writing. His own lawyers, presumably the best money can buy, drafted a deed of gift transferring 100% of the property to you. He would have to argue in court that despite his own written words, the gift was conditional upon a marriage he himself refused to complete. The judge would laugh him out of the courtroom." The implication of Eleanor's words began to dawn on Sophia, piercing through her grief. The house, the 9-bedroom, 15,000-square-foot mansion on 2 acres of the most valuable coastline in the world. The house currently worth an estimated $45 million. "So you're saying," Sophia began, her voice trembling with a new, unfamiliar emotion, "I'm saying—" Eleanor interrupted, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "that Julian Croft didn't just give you a house. He gave you a fortress, and he handed you the keys, the cannons, and all the ammunition. The house isn't a marital asset to be divided, Sophia. It's not his to take back." Eleanor leaned forward, her expression fierce and exhilarating. "It's your property, and tomorrow morning we are going to take possession of it." The sun had barely begun to cast a pale grey light over the Pacific when Sophia's Mercedes, followed by a sleek black SUV, wound its way up the serpentine coastal highway towards Malibu. The storm of the previous night had passed, leaving behind a sky washed clean and a cold, resolute calm in Sophia's soul. She was no longer a victim. She was a woman on a mission. Beside her, Eleanor Vance was on her phone, speaking in a low, authoritative tone. "The team is in place. They have their instructions. No aggression unless initiated. Their presence is for peacekeeping and to witness the transfer of property. Yes, the locksmith is 2 minutes out. The local sheriff's department has been notified of a potential civil dispute and will be on standby." Sophia gripped the steering wheel. This felt surreal, like a scene from a movie, but the cold weight of the documents in her briefcase was very real. This morning, before the banks had even opened, Eleanor had worked a miracle calling in a favor with a bank manager to get Sophia access to her safe deposit box. Inside her briefcase now lay the original notarized deed to Serenity House and the sickeningly sweet card from Julian that was now her golden ticket. As they rounded the final bend, the house came into view. It was a masterpiece of glass and white stone, cantilevered over the cliff's edge, seeming to float between the sky and the sea. It was meant to be the backdrop to her perfect life. Today, it was a battlefield. She saw Julian's black Ferrari parked in the driveway, alongside a sporty white Porsche. She didn't recognize Amber's, presumably. A fresh wave of nausea and anger rolled through her, but she pushed it down, converting it into fuel. As Sophia pulled to a stop before the imposing electronic gates, the black SUV parked behind her. 3 large men in discreet dark suits emerged. They were not thugs. They were professional security ex-military, by the look of them calm and imposing. Their leader, a man named Marcus with a scar on his chin, nodded at Eleanor. "We're ready, Miss Vance," he said. "Sophia," Eleanor said, turning to her, "you are the legal owner of this property. You have every right to be here. You have the right to ask anyone not invited by you to leave. Let me do the talking. You just stand there and look like you own the place. Because you do." Sophia took a deep breath, opened her car door, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The locksmith was already at the pedestrian gate, his tools ready. Within a minute, there was a quiet click, and the gate swung open. They walked up the long stone driveway, their footsteps echoing in the morning stillness. Marcus and one of his men flanked Sophia and Eleanor, while the third stayed at the gate. The sheer beauty of the place, the Zen gardens, the infinity pool that bled into the horizon, was a bitter pill. Eleanor rang the doorbell. There was a long pause. Then the door opened. Julian stood there, dressed only in a pair of silk pajama bottoms, his hair tousled from sleep. His expression of sleepy annoyance curdled into one of utter shock when he saw Sophia flanked by a lawyer and 2 imposing security guards. "Sophia, what the hell is this?" he stammered, his voice rough. "Good morning, Julian," Eleanor said, stepping forward. "I am Eleanor Vance, Ms. Rossie's legal counsel. We're here to supervise my client as she takes possession of her property." Julian blinked, uncomprehending. "Her property? What are you talking about? This is my house." From behind him, Amber appeared, wrapped in one of Julian's expensive silk robes. Her hair a mess, her face puffy with sleep. She smirked when she saw Sophia. "Look what the cat dragged in. Come to beg for a second chance." Sophia ignored her completely, her eyes fixed on Julian. She let him see the coldness in her gaze, the absolute absence of the love he had taken for granted. "I think you're mistaken, Julian," Eleanor said, calmly opening her briefcase. She produced a certified copy of the deed. "This is a deed of gift executed on November the 10th of last year, transferring full ownership of the property, located at 1 Cliffside Drive, Malibu, to one Sophia Rossi. It is her name and her name alone on the title. As she is the sole owner, she has decided that she no longer wishes for you to reside here." Julian stared at the paper, then back at Eleanor, a dawning horror on his face. He seemed to shrink before their eyes, the powerful CEO persona dissolving into that of a panicked, cornered man. That's insane," he sputtered. "That was a gift. For our marriage, the wedding is off. You can't just—" "Actually, we can," Eleanor cut in smoothly. "Your generous handwritten card that accompanied this deed described it as unconditional. A very specific legal term. You, Julian, are a guest here, and your invitation has just been revoked." Amber's smirk had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed panic. "Julian! What is she talking about?" Julian ignored her, his eyes wild with rage fixed on Sophia. "You won't get away with this, Izzy. This is a $45 million house. I will bury you in legal fees until you're begging on the street." "Threats are duly noted," Eleanor said, gesturing to the security team. "Now Ms. Rossi is being extremely generous. She is giving you and your Guest, 1 hour to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises. My men will accompany you to ensure you only take what is rightfully yours. Any attempt to remove art furniture or any other fixture of the house will be considered theft. She then handed him a crisp business card. Any further communication can go through my office. The locksmith is here to change the locks. Your hour starts now. Julian looked as though he had been physically struck. The color drained from his face as he finally understood. He had been so sure of his power, so certain of Sophia's weakness, that he had never considered his grand romantic gesture could be used as a weapon against him. He had built his own prison and handed her the key. "Get out," Sophia said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but carried the absolute authority of ownership. "Get your things, and get out of my house." The look of utter hatred he gave her was terrifying, but it no longer had any power over her. As Marcus and his men stepped inside, motioning for Julian and a now frantic Amber to head upstairs, Sophia walked past them. She went through the vast cathedral-like living room with its floor-to-ceiling glass walls and stepped out onto the magnificent terrace. The sun was higher now, glinting off the endless expanse of the Pacific. She breathed in the salty air, not as a guest or a fiancée, but as the master of it all. The victory was not sweet. It was sharp, cold, and utterly necessary. The war was just beginning, but she had just won the first decisive battle. The news of Julian Croft's public humiliation and subsequent eviction from his own clifftop mansion spread through the gilded circles of Los Angeles like a shockwave. It wasn't just gossip, it was a saga. The story had everything wealth, sex, betrayal, and a stunning reversal of fortune. Page 6 ran a headline, "Croft's Cruel Toast, Bride's Bold Repossession." TMZ had helicopters circling the Malibu coastline, trying to get a shot of the house that had become the most famous piece of real estate in the city. For Julian, the humiliation was absolute. He had gone from being the triumphant alpha male, securing his new life, to a laughingstock overnight. He, a titan of industry, had been outmaneuvered and thrown out of a $45 million property by the quiet art historian he had so casually discarded. His ego, a fragile thing, for all its size, was shattered. He holed up with Amber in a suite at the Beverly Hills Hotel, a temporary measure that felt like a gilded prison. Amber, who had envisioned a seamless transition into a life of unimaginable luxury, was now dealing with a furious, distracted man whose reputation was in flames. The triumphant glow she'd had at the rehearsal dinner was gone, replaced by a nervous, grasping anxiety. This was not the victory she had signed up for. Julian did what men like him always do. When cornered, he threw money and lawyers at the problem. He hired the most ruthless legal team in the state, a firm known for its scorched earth tactics. Within 48 hours, Eleanor's office was served with a lawsuit demanding the immediate return of the property and seeking punitive damages against Sophia for emotional distress conversion and malicious intent. The legal complaint was a work of fiction. It painted Julian as a loving, generous fiancé who had been manipulated by a scheming and avaricious Sophia into signing over the deed. It claimed he was under emotional duress at the time, so blinded by love that he was not of sound mind. It argued the gift was implicitly, if not explicitly, conditional on the marriage that Sophia's erratic behavior had allegedly jeopardized. "It's a declaration of war," Eleanor said, sliding the thick document across the massive marble island in Serenity House's kitchen. Sophia had spent the last 2 days in a surreal state, wandering the cavernous rooms, the sole inhabitant of a palace built on lies. They're going to paint you as a gold digger. They'll leak stories to the press, dredge up every ex-boyfriend, scrutinize every purchase you ever made with his money. They will try to break you. Let them try, Sophia said, her voice hard. They have no idea what's in this house. While Julian's lawyers were drafting complaints, Sophia had been conducting a meticulous inventory. As an art historian, she had always been quietly impressed by the collection of modern art Julian had used to decorate the mansion. He'd boasted about the pieces dropping names like Rothko Pollock and de Kooning. He'd spent millions, he claimed, but now, looking at them not as a loving fiancée, but with her professional critical eye, she saw things she had previously overlooked. A slight inconsistency in the brushwork on the Pollock, a questionable provenance document for the Rothko, a feeling deep in her gut that something was wrong. She spent a full day in the mansion's library, which also served as Julian's home office. She had the code to his safe. It was ironically their planned wedding date. Inside, amongst corporate files and stock certificates, she found what she was looking for: the acquisition records and authentication papers for the art collection. She spent hours cross-referencing the documents with online databases and contacting discreet experts she knew from her museum days. By the 3rd day, the picture was becoming terrifyingly clear. She called Eleanor. "You need to come back to the house, and you need to bring a forensic accountant." When Eleanor arrived, Sophia had several files laid out on the dining room table. "The Pollock is a fake," Sophia stated without preamble. "A very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. I had a colleague at the Getty analyze the high-res photos of the signature. It's off." "Okay," Eleanor said slowly. "So he got duped. It hurts his pride, but how does it help us?" "That's just the start," Sophia said, pushing another file forward. "This is the invoice for the Pollock. He paid $1.2 million for it. But he didn't buy it from a gallery. He bought it from a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands called Artifact Solutions." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Go on." "I did some digging. Artifact Solutions is owned by another holding company, which is owned by another. But the money trail eventually leads back to a man named Sergei Volkov, a Russian oligarch with known ties to organized crime who has been under international sanctions for years." Sophia then pointed to the wire transfer confirmation. "But here's the real problem. Julian's company, Croft Enterprises, expensed the purchase of this fake painting as a legitimate business investment for corporate office decoration. A public company. He used shareholder money to buy a forged painting from a shell corp tied to a sanctioned Russian oligarch." Eleanor stared at the documents, her legal mind spinning, connecting the dots. "It's not just the Pollock," Sophia continued, her voice grim. "It's the Rothko, the de Kooning. He has a dozen pieces in this house. The invoices total over $15 million. I suspect they're all fakes. He wasn't buying art, Eleanor. He was laundering money." The room was silent for a long moment. The lawsuit, the public smearing the fight for the house, it all seemed like child's play now. Julian wasn't just a cheating fiancé with a bruised ego. He was a criminal. His desperation to get the house back suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't about the money or the humiliation. It was about the evidence. The entire mansion was a beautifully decorated crime scene, and he had handed it over to the one person who had the expertise to figure it out. Eleanor finally looked up from the papers, a look of awe on her face. "Sophia, you haven't just won the battle. You've just acquired the nuclear codes." The discovery transformed the nature of the conflict. It was no longer a bitter, high-stakes divorce that never was. It was a game of corporate espionage and criminal exposure. The $45 million mansion was now secondary to the secrets it held within its walls. Sophia felt a strange, terrifying sense of power. The grief for the man she thought she loved had been cauterized by his betrayal, and now what was left was a cold, clear sense of purpose. He hadn't just tried to humiliate her. His entire life, the foundation of the empire he was so proud of, was built on a bedrock of fraud. Under Eleanor's guidance, they moved with surgical precision. They hired a discreet, independent firm to authenticate the entire art collection. The verdict came back within a week. Of the 15 major works in the house, 12 were high-quality forgeries. The total value of the invoices was over $22 million paid by Croft Enterprises to a web of offshore shell corporations. Next, the forensic accountant Eleanor had brought in, a quiet man named David Chen, began a deep dive into the hard drives and financial records Sophia had found in the safe. What he unearthed was even more damning than the art fraud. "It's a classic scheme, just on a grander scale," David explained in a meeting at Eleanor's office. The original documents never left the mansion, which was now under 24/7 security. Julian was using the art as a pretext. He would have Croft Enterprises purchase a wildly expensive piece of art for corporate display. The money would be wired to one of the offshore shells. That shell company would then kick back about 70% of the funds into a private encrypted account controlled by Julian. The remaining 30% went to the forgers and the money launderers like Volkov. He wasn't just cleaning money for others. He was systematically embezzling from his own publicly traded company. The scale of it was staggering. Over 5 years, they estimated, Julian had personally siphoned off more than $50 million from his company, defrauding his shareholders and board of directors. The house wasn't a gift of love, Sophia murmured, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. It was a storage unit, a very beautiful, very expensive storage unit for his crimes. He put it in my name because he thought it would be the safest place in the world, shielded from any corporate or federal inquiry. Who would ever think to look in his loving fiancée's home? The ultimate irony. Eleanor said, a grim smile on her face. His greatest act of hubris became his greatest liability. Meanwhile, Julian's public relations war against Sophia was in full swing. Anonymous sources, clearly Julian's camp, leaked stories to tabloids portraying Sophia as unstable and greedy. An old college boyfriend was paid to give an interview, suggesting she had always been attracted to power and money. A headline on a gossip blog read, "Sophia Rossi Jilted Bride" or "Golden Viper." Sophia ignored it all. The noise didn't matter. They were fighting a battle in the mud, while she was sitting in a stealth bomber, her fingers hovering over the release button. The final piece of leverage came from an unexpected place. As Sophia was methodically clearing out Julian's remaining personal effects from the library, things his movers had forgotten, she found a small personal journal tucked away behind a row of leather-bound classics. It wasn't a business ledger, but a diary of sorts. Her first instinct was to burn it, to not sink to his level. But Eleanor had been clear, document everything. She read it. The entries were filled with narcissistic ramblings about his own brilliance, his frustrations with his board of directors, and his contempt for the lesser people around him. But then she found the entries about Amber. He didn't write about love. He wrote about conquest. He described Amber as a thrilling diversion, an easy conquest, and most tellingly a useful pawn. In one entry from just a month before the rehearsal dinner, he wrote, "Amber is getting demanding. She thinks she's won the grand prize. She doesn't realize she's just a tool to extricate myself from the tedious prospect of marriage. Izzy has become too aware, too much of a partner. I need a consort, not a co-CEO. Amber will be far more manageable. He had never loved Amber. He was using her just as he had used Sophia, just as he used his company and his shareholders. He had detonated his life and publicly humiliated Sophia, all as a calculated move to trade in one woman he saw as a potential threat for another he saw as a controllable object. Sophia photocopied the relevant pages. The original went back into the safe with the financial records and art authentication reports. They were ready. Eleanor reached out to Julian's legal team. "We are prepared to discuss a private settlement," she told them, "but not in our offices or yours, a neutral location, and Mr. Croft must be present." Julian's lawyers, arrogant and confident in their public smearing campaign, readily agreed. They assumed Sophia was buckling under the pressure, ready to negotiate a small settlement in exchange for the return of the house. They booked a conference room at a neutral law firm in Century City. They had absolutely no idea they were walking into an execution. The conference room was a sterile environment of polished wood and muted grey tones, designed to project an aura of calm, rational negotiation. Julian Croft strode in, flanked by his two lead attorneys, Howard Lynch and a younger aggressive associate. Julian himself looked tired but defiant, his face set in a mask of arrogant indignation. He and his team were radiating confidence. They believed they were there to accept Sophia's surrender. Amber was not present. Julian had already relegated her to the sidelines, a bauble no longer needed for display. On the other side of the vast table sat Sophia, looking serene and impeccably dressed in a sharp, dark blue suit. Beside her was Eleanor Vance, her briefcase resting on the table, and the forensic accountant David Chen, who sat quietly with a laptop. His presence was the first thing that seemed to throw Julian's team off balance. "Let's make this quick," Howard Lynch began, his voice booming with manufactured authority. "My client has been more than generous. We are prepared to offer Ms. Rossi a one-time payment of $2 million conditional on her vacating the property within 24 hours and signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Given her malicious actions, this is an incredibly charitable offer." Eleanor listened patiently until he was finished. She didn't respond to the offer. Instead, she slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "We can start by discussing this." It was a copy of the deed to Serenity House. Lynch scoffed. "We've seen this. It's the entire basis of our lawsuit. A gift made under false pretenses and in clear contemplation of a marriage my client was forced to call off." "Forced?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That's a creative interpretation of a public humiliation." She then slid a second document across. It was a copy of the handwritten card from Julian. "You'll note the word unconditional, a difficult word to argue against." Lynch's confident expression tightened slightly. "A romantic flourish, not a legal term." "Let's assume for a moment that you're right," Eleanor said calmly. "Let's assume you want to spend the next 3 years and millions of dollars in legal fees arguing the definition of unconditional in open court with the press watching every move. You might even have a small chance of winning. But we're not here to talk about the house anymore." She nodded to David Chen. He turned his laptop around, revealing a complex flowchart of company names and offshore accounts. "We are here to talk about Artifact Solutions," Eleanor said, her voice dropping, becoming sharp and precise. "And Sergei Volkov, and the systematic embezzlement of over $50 million from Croft Enterprises over the past 5 years. The color drained from Julian's face. He stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. His lawyer Lynch leaned forward, his eyes widening in disbelief as he recognized the names and structures. The younger associate shuffled his papers, suddenly looking terrified. "We have invoices, wire transfers, and sworn expert authentications for 12 forged works of art currently housed in my client's property." Eleanor continued, her voice like ice. "Works of art purchased with shareholder money to facilitate a money laundering and embezzlement scheme. We have hard drives. We have server logs." She paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "Your lawsuit against my client for the return of the house is no longer just a civil matter. It's an attempt to reclaim and destroy federal evidence. That's obstruction of justice." Lynch was speechless. He looked at Julian, whose mask of defiance had crumbled into raw, naked panic. "This is," Lynch stammered, "this is blackmail." "Don't be ridiculous, Howard," Eleanor countered smoothly. "Blackmail is demanding payment to conceal a crime. We are not demanding anything of the sort. We are simply laying out my client's options. Option A. We reject your insulting offer, and my client, a law-abiding citizen, turns over all of this evidence, every last document, to the SEC, the IRS, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Your client will be ruined, disbarred from serving as an officer of any public company for life, and will almost certainly face a lengthy prison sentence. Croft Enterprises will collapse in the ensuing scandal." She let that image hang in the air before continuing. Or option B. She slid a final document across the table. It was a settlement agreement drafted by her office. "You will immediately and irrevocably drop your lawsuit regarding the Malibu property. You will sign a document relinquishing any and all future claims to the house and its entire contents. You will place $25 million into a trust for Ms. Rossi as compensation for the public humiliation, emotional distress, and the considerable risk she has been exposed to by unknowingly living in a warehouse for your criminal enterprise. And you will both sign a mutual ironclad NDA with the understanding that if you ever breathe a negative word about her again, the evidence package gets sent to the authorities." She leaned forward. "And one last thing." She pulled out the photocopied pages from Julian's journal. "My client is also in possession of your personal journal, which details your contemptible and manipulative plans regarding Ms. Amber Cole. She has no desire to hurt another woman, even one who has wronged her. But if you do not sign this agreement, a copy of those pages will be sent anonymously to every major gossip columnist in this town. Your betrayal of your fiancée was a scandal. Your callous and premeditated use of your mistress will make you a pariah." It was a complete checkmate. Every escape route was cut off. Julian was trapped, exposed, and utterly defeated. The fight was gone from his eyes, replaced by the hollow look of a man staring into the abyss of his own making. He looked at his lawyer, who gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head, a clear signal that there was no way out. The evidence was too overwhelming, the threat too catastrophic. Julian picked up the pen, his hand trembling slightly. Without another word, he signed every page of the settlement agreement. He had walked in, expecting to crush his former fiancée. He walked out, having lost his house, a significant portion of his stolen fortune, and the last vestiges of his power. Sophia watched him leave, feeling not triumph, but a quiet, profound sense of release. It was over. 2 weeks later, she stood on the terrace of the Malibu mansion for the last time. The house was sold. An all-cash buyer, an anonymous tech billionaire, had snapped it up in days. The forged art was gone, handed over to federal authorities as part of a quiet deal Eleanor had brokered. Sophia had the $25 million settlement, the proceeds from the mansion sale, and her freedom. She had won, not by sinking to his level, but by using her intelligence, her composure, and the very tools he had used to control others. He had handed her a gilded cage, and she had used its golden bars to dismantle his entire world. She looked out at this ocean, took a deep breath of the free, salty air, and walked away to start her new life, leaving the ghosts of Julian Croft and Serenity House behind forever. And that's the incredible story of how Sophia Rossi turned the worst night of her life into the ultimate victory. It's a powerful reminder that the game isn't over until the final move is played. Julian Croft thought he held all the cards, but he forgot that true power isn't about money or public declarations. It's about intelligence, resilience, and knowing your own worth. Sophia didn't just get revenge. She reclaimed her life and her future, proving that sometimes the best way to get over a man is to get everything he owns. What did you think of Sophia's brilliant countermove? Let us know in the comments below. If you love stories of epic revenge and karma, served cold, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a dose of empowerment, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another unbelievable true-life story. Thanks for listening. The crystal ballroom of the Grand Majestic Hotel was suffocating in diamonds and champagne. It was the annual Innovators Gala, the pinnacle of the city's tech elite, and at its center stood Ethan and Clara Hayes, the golden couple. He was the self-made billionaire, CEO of Aura Innovations. She was his beautiful, angelic wife, 6 months pregnant with their first child. To the hundreds of guests, they were the picture of absolute perfection. But perfection is often the most fragile illusion. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a video is worth the truth. In 60 seconds, one man's uncontrollable rage and 100 smartphone cameras would not just shatter an illusion, but burn an entire empire to the ground. This is the story of what happened when the monster behind the perfect husband was exposed to the world. The air in the crystal ballroom was thick with the scent of money, a heady mix of expensive perfume, French champagne, and the quiet, self-satisfied hum of the city's most powerful people. Clara Hayes felt a familiar wave of anxiety tighten its grip around her chest, a feeling she had grown adept at concealing behind a serene, practiced smile. She rested a hand on the gentle swell of her stomach, the life growing within her, a secret anchor in this turbulent sea of ambition and pretense. Her husband, Ethan Hayes, was in his element. He moved through the crowd with the predatory grace of a shark, his hand possessively on the small of her back. His smile was dazzling, his charisma a palpable force that drew people into his orbit. He was the founder and CEO of Aura Innovations, a tech behemoth that had revolutionized personal data security. To the world, he was a visionary, a genius. To Clara, he was the architect of her beautiful, suffocating cage. "Darling, you look breathtaking," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear, his voice low and intimate for the benefit of a passing journalist from Forbes. But Clara felt the chill in his touch. It wasn't affection. It was a reminder that she was an accessory, the most valuable piece in his collection, meant to be admired, but never to speak out of turn. Her gown of flowing emerald silk that cost more than her first car had been his choice. Her jewelry, a cascade of diamonds that felt heavy around her neck, had been his selection. Her smile was his command. "Thank you, Ethan," she replied, her voice a soft melody that belied the tremor within. "You're very handsome tonight." He squeezed her waist a little too tightly. Just remember to stick to the script, Clara. We talk about the new charitable foundation, The Baby, and how supportive you are of the company's expansion. No surprises. Of course, she said, nodding. No surprises. That was the cardinal rule of their marriage. For 2 hours, she played her part flawlessly. She laughed at the right jokes, offered charming anecdotes about their nursery preparations, and gazed at her husband with what she hoped passed for adoration. But her eyes kept scanning the room, a nervous tic she couldn't control. She was looking for Sophia Russo. Sophia was Aura's head of global strategy. She was sharp, ambitious, and devastatingly beautiful, with raven hair and a predatory intelligence in her eyes that mirrored Ethan's. For the past 6 months, Clara had seen the signs. The late-night board meetings, the lingering scent of a different perfume on his suits, the secretive texts that would make him smile in a way he never smiled at her anymore. Clara had even tried to bring it up once gently. The resulting rage had been terrifying. A thrown crystal glass, a venomous tirade about her paranoid hormonal delusions, and a week of icy silence had taught her never to question him again. She spotted them near the towering ice sculpture of Aura's logo. Ethan had his back to her, but the angle was unmistakable. He was leaning in close to Sophia, his head bent as he spoke. Sophia laughed, a throaty, confident sound that echoed across the marble floor, and placed a perfectly manicured hand on his forearm. It lingered there for a fraction of a second too long. It was a gesture of such casual intimacy that it felt like a physical blow to Clara. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He had promised. After her last episode, he had sworn on the life of their unborn child that there was nothing going on, that she was his entire world. He had made her feel crazy irrational. Yet here was the proof, bold and glittering under the chandeliers. A wave of nausea entirely unrelated to her pregnancy washed over her. She needed air. Excusing herself from a conversation with a city councilman, she whispered to Ethan, "I'm just going to step out onto the terrace for a moment." He didn't even look at her. "Fine. Don't be long. We're about to make the announcement." His focus was already back on Sophia. The cold night air was a relief, but it couldn't cool the fire of betrayal burning in her gut. She leaned against the stone balustrade, overlooking the city's glittering skyline. For years she had told herself this was enough. The security, the lifestyle, the public image of a perfect marriage. She had traded her own ambitions, her friends, her very self for this. And for what? To be a broodmare and a prop publicly humiliated while her husband conducted an affair with his colleague. The baby kicked a soft, insistent flutter. It was a reminder of why she had stayed, why she had endured. She wanted this child to have a perfect life, a complete family. But what kind of life would it be built on a foundation of lies and fear? Taking a deep, shaky breath, she decided she couldn't let it go. Not tonight. Not when the lie was being so brazenly flaunted in front of everyone. The old Clara, the one before Ethan had systematically dismantled her confidence, would have confronted him. Tonight, Clara had to return. She pushed herself off the balustrade, a new steely resolve hardening her features, and walked back into the ballroom. She was done being a silent accessory. She was going to get the truth. She had no idea that in doing so, she was about to light a fuse that would incinerate her entire world. Clara re-entered the ballroom with a purpose that felt foreign and exhilarating. Her usual deference was gone, replaced by a cold clarity. She scanned the room, her eyes finding Ethan almost immediately. He was no longer with Sophia, but was now standing on the low-lit stage at the far end of the room, a microphone in his hand, preparing for the gala's main event, his keynote address and a major company announcement. Her heart sank. The timing was terrible. A public confrontation now would be a catastrophe. Perhaps she should wait. But as she watched him bask in the adulation of the crowd, a switch flipped inside her. He was about to stand before hundreds of people and speak of integrity, vision, and family, the very things he was desecrating in his private life. She couldn't let him. She started moving toward the stage, a lone figure in emerald silk against the tide of rapt faces. People turned to look at her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and confusion. She ignored them. Her focus was solely on the man bathed in the spotlight. Ethan saw her approaching. A flicker of annoyance crossed his perfect features, quickly masked by his public smile. He subtly angled his body away, a clear signal for her to return to her seat. She kept walking. She reached the side of the stage, just as he was starting his speech. "And so as we look to the future of Aura Innovations," he began, his voice resonating through the ballroom's sound system, "we are guided by one core principle: transparency." The hypocrisy was so staggering that a bitter laugh almost escaped Clara's lips. She took the 3 short steps up onto the stage. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Ethan's smile froze. "Clara, what are you doing?" he hissed into the microphone, which was still live, his voice a dangerous whisper that carried to the first few rows. "I need to talk to you, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "Now, get off the stage," he commanded, his eyes turning to black ice. He tried to grab her arm, but she sidestepped him. The audience was now a sea of bewildered faces. The low hum of conversation had ceased, replaced by an unnerving silence. Then a few pinpricks of light appeared in the darkness. Smartphones. People were starting to record. One of those phones belonged to David Smith, a tenacious tech blogger known for his scathing takedowns of corporate hypocrisy. He'd had a feeling about Ethan Hayes for years, a sense that the man's flawless public persona was a sham. He zoomed in his finger steady on the record button. "We can talk about this later, Clara," Ethan said, his voice dropping lower, each word laced with menace. He turned his back to the audience, shielding their exchange from most eyes, but not from the lenses. "You are making a scene. You are embarrassing me." "Am I?" Clara shot back, her newfound courage surging. "Or are you embarrassing yourself with Sophia Russo?" Ethan's face went white with fury. The mask of the charming CEO dissolved, revealing the monster beneath. "You foolish girl!" He spat the words inaudible to the crowd, but crystal clear on David Smith's recording. "I warned you about this. I warned you about your paranoid fantasies." "It's not a fantasy," she cried, her voice cracking. "I saw you with her. Everyone sees it." "How dare you stand up here and talk about transparency when you are lying to my face, to everyone?" It happened in a horrifying instant. Ethan's control snapped. His hand shot out, not to restrain her, but to silence her. He didn't punch her. It was something more intimate, more degrading. He slapped her. The sound was sharp and ugly, a crack that echoed in the cavernous, silent room. The force of it sent Clara stumbling backward. Her heel caught on a cable, and she lost her balance. Time seemed to slow down as she fell, her hands flying instinctively to her pregnant belly. She landed hard on her side, the air knocked from her lungs in a pained gasp. For a full 5 seconds, there was absolute stunned silence. No one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the world had stopped turning. The image was surreal, the beloved philanthropist on the floor, the visionary billionaire standing over her, with a look of pure, unadulterated rage on his face. Then the dam broke. A woman in the front row screamed. A dozen more phones were raised, their screens glowing like accusatory eyes in the dim light. David Smith kept recording, his heart pounding. He knew he was capturing more than a domestic dispute. He was capturing the implosion of an empire. Ethan seemed to snap out of his stupor, the horror of his actions dawning on him, not with remorse, but with the cold dread of public exposure. He looked out at the sea of phones, at the shocked and horrified faces, and his carefully constructed world crumbled into dust around him. He had just committed career suicide on a live-streamed stage, and his pregnant wife was lying on the floor, the living proof of his monstrosity. The unmasking was complete. The 5 seconds of stunned silence felt like an eternity. Then chaos erupted. But it wasn't the chaos of a mob. It was the chillingly modern chaos of the digital age. Before security could even reach the stage, before anyone could help Clara to her feet, the first video was already being uploaded. David Smith didn't hesitate. He added a simple, brutal caption. CEO Ethan Hayes of Aura Innovations physically assaults his pregnant wife, Clara Hayes, on stage at the Innovators Gala. He tagged every major news outlet he could think of and added the hashtag #Ethan Hayes exposed. Then he hit post. The video shot across the internet like wildfire. It was raw, shaky, and undeniable. It captured everything: Clara's desperate plea, Ethan's whispered threats, the sickening crack of the slap, and the horrifying thud of her fall. Within 10 minutes, #Ethan Hayes exposed was the #1 trending topic worldwide. On the stage, the immediate aftermath was a blur of frantic movement. A stout, silver-haired woman in a Chanel suit was the first to reach Clara. It was Eleanor Vance, a formidable presence on Aura's board of directors, known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude. She knelt beside Clara, ignoring Ethan completely. "Are you all right, dear? The baby?" Eleanor's voice was firm but gentle. Clara, dazed and trembling, could only nod, tears streaming down her face. "I think so. I think we're okay." Ethan, meanwhile, had been swarmed by his own security team. "Get her out of here!" He was snarling, gesturing wildly at Clara. "And confiscate those phones. All of them." But it was like trying to cup water in a sieve. The evidence was already out. His PR team, led by a panicked-looking man named Marcus, was trying to run damage control, but it was impossible. The story was moving faster than they could type a press release. News vans were screeching to a halt outside the Grand Majestic before most of the guests had even processed what they had seen. The gala, a celebration of innovation, had become the scene of a brutal crime, and the world was watching in real time. By the time Eleanor Vance had helped Clara to a private room, shielding her from the flashing cameras of the guests, the digital storm was a full-blown hurricane. The stock for Aura Innovations, set to open on the Asian market in a few hours, was already in free fall in after-hours trading. Investors were panicking. The company, built on the promise of security and trust, was now inextricably linked to an act of violent public betrayal. Comments poured in by the thousands per second. "I just cancelled my Aura subscription. I will not support a wife-beater. My God, she's pregnant. What kind of monster does that? He didn't even try to help her. He just looked at the cameras. A true narcissist." Sophia Russo had vanished from the ballroom the moment the slap landed. She was already on the phone with her lawyer, her mind racing. She was tied to Ethan, but she had to distance herself, and fast. Her ambition was fierce, but it didn't include going down with a sinking ship. Holed up in a suite upstairs, Clara was being checked by the hotel's on-call doctor. The baby's heartbeat was strong, a steady, reassuring rhythm in a world that had just been torn apart. Eleanor Vance sat with her, her expression grim. She had pulled up her own phone and was scrolling through the news feeds. "He's finished," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "The board will convene an emergency meeting at 8 a.m. He'll be forced to resign by noon." Clara looked at the older woman, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a strange, nascent sense of relief. "Is it everywhere?" Eleanor turned her phone so Clara could see. It was a dizzying mosaic of her own horrified face. News headlines screamed from the screen, "Tech Titans Tyranny." The slap heard around the world. Aura of abuse. Ethan Hayes' video goes viral. She saw screenshots of Ethan's face twisted in rage. She saw her own crumpled form on the stage. It was the most humiliating moment of her life broadcast for millions to see. But as she looked at the outpouring of support for her and the vitriol directed at Ethan, she didn't feel shame. She felt validated. The invisible bruises he had inflicted on her soul for years were suddenly visible to everyone. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't paranoid. She was a victim, and now finally people knew it. Ethan, meanwhile, was in his own suite, not with Clara, but with his legal and PR teams. He was pacing like a caged animal, his face a mask of incandescent fury. He wasn't apologetic. He wasn't remorseful. He was furious that he'd been caught. "We need a statement," Marcus, his head of PR, said, his hands shaking. "Something about stress, a private matter, a momentary lapse." "A lapse?" Ethan roared, sweeping a vase of orchids off a table. It shattered against the wall. "She provoked me. She came up on that stage to ruin me, and she did. This is her fault." His lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. This was not the attitude of a man seeking redemption. This was the fury of a tyrant whose power had been challenged. "We'll draft something," one of the lawyers said placatingly. "We'll say Mrs. Hayes was emotionally distressed due to her pregnancy and Mr. Hayes reacted poorly under immense pressure. We'll ask for privacy as they work through this difficult family matter." It was a weak, pathetic strategy, and they all knew it. The video was too clear, the act too brutal. There was no spinning this. The digital storm was raging, and it was washing away Ethan Hayes' name, his company, and his entire life, one damning share and retweet at a time. While Ethan Hayes barricaded himself in his multi-million-dollar penthouse, turning it into a fortress against the besieging army of media, Clara Hayes became a fugitive. But she wasn't running from the law. She was running from the life she knew. Eleanor Vance had arranged for a private car to take her from the hotel through a service exit, shielding her from the paparazzi swarming the main entrance. The obvious choice would have been to go to her parents in Connecticut, but Clara knew that would be the first place Ethan would look. He wouldn't come with apologies, but with threats and manipulations determined to coerce her into a joint statement that would salvage his reputation. She couldn't face that. Not yet. There was only one other place she could go, one person she could trust implicitly. A name from a life before Ethan, a life where she had been her own person. "Take me to Brooklyn," she told the driver, giving him an address he would never find in a society magazine. She arrived at a modest pre-war brownstone just before dawn. She paid the driver in cash and watched him pull away before she climbed the steps and rang the bell. The door opened a crack, and a tired face with sharp, intelligent eyes peered out. "Clara." Jessica Riley's voice was thick with sleep, but her eyes snapped wide with recognition and shock. "Oh my God! Get in here!" Jessica was a prosecutor for the DA's office, a woman who dealt with the city's worst criminals on a daily basis. She and Clara had been inseparable in college, but their lives had diverged dramatically. As Clara had been drawn deeper into Ethan's world of galas and empty pleasantries, her friendship with the blunt, fiercely independent Jessica had faded a casualty of Ethan's isolating control. Jessica pulled her into a hug, and for the first time that night, Clara allowed herself to break. The sobs came in ragged, painful waves for her shattered marriage, for her unborn child, for the years she had lost. Jessica just held her murmuring, soothing words until the storm passed. "I've seen the video, Clara," Jessica said softly, leading her to a worn but comfortable sofa. "The whole world has." Meanwhile, across the river in his glass-walled fortress, Ethan was waging a war. He was on the phone, screaming at his board members, his investors, his lawyers. But for the first time in his life, his voice held no power. The video had stripped him of his authority. He was no longer a visionary. He was a liability, a pariah. As predicted, the emergency board meeting was swift and brutal. By 9 a.m., Aura Innovations had released a statement. "The board of directors has voted unanimously to place CEO Ethan Hayes on an indefinite leave of absence. An interim CEO has been appointed. Aura Innovations has a zero-tolerance policy for violence and abuse of any kind." It was a corporate execution. Ethan saw the news alert on his phone and hurled it across the room, where it shattered against a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Central Park. He was out. Kicked out of the company he had built from nothing. His rage, denied a physical outlet, festered into a cunning, desperate plan. He had his PR team release the statement he had conceived hours earlier. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. "I'm deeply ashamed of my actions last night," the statement read. "The pressures of my work, combined with my wife Clara's fragile emotional state during her pregnancy, led to a regrettable and momentary loss of control. This is a private family matter, and we ask for space as we seek counseling and healing together. I love my wife, and I am dedicated to making amends." It was a disgusting, calculated lie designed to paint Clara as an unstable hormonal woman and himself as a stressed but ultimately loving husband. It was an attempt to muddy the waters, to turn the narrative from abuser and victim to troubled couple. In Brooklyn, Jessica read the statement aloud from her laptop, her voice dripping with contempt. "The nerve of that son of a bitch. Fragile emotional state. He's trying to discredit you before you can even speak." Clara, wrapped in a borrowed blanket and nursing a cup of tea, felt a cold fury replace her fear. "That's what he does," she said, her voice hollow. "He twists everything. He makes you believe you're the one who's crazy." "Not this time." Jessica said, her prosecutor's mind already whirring connecting dots. "This time he did it in front of 1,000 witnesses. This time he left a digital trail that can't be erased. He thinks he's holed up in a fortress, but all he's done is trap himself. And you're not a fugitive, Clara. You're a survivor. And we're going to make sure he pays for what he did." Jessica's apartment wasn't a gilded cage. It was a sanctuary. And for the first time in a very long time, Clara felt safe. The media could rage, Ethan could spin his lies, and the world could watch. She was out of his reach. The power dynamic had shifted. He was the one who was trapped a prisoner in his own ivory tower, while she, the fugitive, was finally terrifyingly free. For 3 days, the world was obsessed with the public drama of the Hayeses. Ethan remained silent in his penthouse, a pariah in self-imposed exile. Clara stayed with Jessica, shielded from the storm, focusing on her health and the baby. The public narrative, despite Ethan's attempts to poison it, was firmly on her side. Domestic violence charities reported a surge in donations in her name. The story seemed simple. A powerful man's private monstrosity was publicly exposed. But Jessica Riley didn't believe in simple stories. As a prosecutor, she knew that a crime like this was often just the tip of the iceberg, the visible peak of a much larger, darker mass of secrets. "He's not just an abuser, Clara," Jessica said on the third evening, pacing her small living room, a legal pad in her hand. "Men like Ethan narcissists. With this level of control, their corruption is never confined to one area of their lives. It bleeds into everything. His business, his finances, everything." "What do you mean?" Clara asked. "I mean, why was he so terrified of you making a scene? It's more than just public embarrassment, losing his temper like that. It was the act of a man with everything to lose, someone terrified of a secret getting out." Jessica stopped pacing and looked at Clara. "Think, has he been acting strange about business lately? Secretive about finances? Anything out of the ordinary?" Clara thought back over the past year. The endless meetings, the sudden unexplained business trips to the Cayman Islands, the way he would lock his office at home, something he'd never done before. And then a memory surfaced, small but sharp. About 2 months ago, she walked into his home office to ask him a question. He had slammed his laptop shut so fast it almost broke the screen. But not before she saw a name on a spreadsheet, Project Nightingale. "There was something," Clara said slowly. "A project he was working on. He was incredibly secretive about it. He called it Project Nightingale." Jessica's eyes lit up. "That's a start." Using her legal research databases and a few discreet calls to contacts in the Financial Crimes Unit, Jessica started digging. What she began to uncover was a web of deceit so intricate it took her breath away. Aura Innovations, the company built on the pillar of transparency, was a house of cards. Ethan had been using a series of shell corporations, all registered in offshore tax havens, to embezzle millions from his own company. He was siphoning funds from investor capital, cooking the books to inflate profits, and creating a massive personal slush fund. Project Nightingale wasn't a new security protocol. It was the code name for his exit strategy. He was planning to cash out, sell the company based on its fraudulent valuation, and disappear with hundreds of millions of dollars, leaving his investors and employees with nothing. But that wasn't the biggest twist. The true shock came when Jessica investigated the shell corporations. The primary signatory on the most active account, the one where the majority of the money was being funneled, wasn't Ethan Hayes. It was Sophia Russo. The affair wasn't just an affair. It was a business partnership. Sophia wasn't just a mistress. She was his co-conspirator in a massive fraud. Her promotion to head of global strategy had given her the access she needed to help facilitate the transfers. Oh my God. Clara breathed, staring at the documents Jessica had printed out. Her betrayal felt like it had doubled in size. This wasn't a simple case of infidelity. This was a calculated criminal conspiracy that she had been living inside of. "It gets worse," Jessica said, her face grim. She pointed to a different document, a copy of the will for Ethan's late father, the original investor in Aura. "There's a clause in his father's trust. Ethan only gains full, unrestricted control of his majority, shares the ones he needs to authorize the sale of the company upon one of 2 conditions: his 40th birthday or the birth of his first legitimate heir." Clara's blood ran cold. Ethan's 40th birthday was still 2 years away. "The baby," she whispered. "He didn't want a family. He needed an heir. He needed a key." The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. His sudden insistence on having a child after years of putting it off. His fury at the gala wasn't just about the affair being exposed. He was terrified that Clara, in her anger, would leave him. A divorce before the baby was born would nullify the clause. She would take his key with her, derailing his entire multi-million-dollar escape plan. His violence wasn't a momentary loss of control. It was a desperate, panicked attempt to maintain control over his most valuable asset, his unborn child, and the woman carrying him. The slap wasn't just an act of abuse. It was an act of financial desperation. "He wasn't just hitting me," Clara said, a horrifying clarity washing over her. "He was protecting his money." "Exactly," Jessica confirmed. "You weren't just an inconvenient wife finding out about an affair. You were a walking, talking threat to his entire criminal enterprise. He had to shut you up at any cost." The story had changed completely. This was no longer just a case of domestic violence. It was now a case of massive corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Clara wasn't just a victim of her husband's temper. She was the unwitting linchpin in a scheme to defraud investors of millions of dollars. And now she held the power to bring it all crashing down. The revelation of Ethan's true motives changed everything for Clara. The pain of personal betrayal morphed into a cold, hard resolve. Her grief was eclipsed by a righteous fury, not just for herself, but for the thousands of employees and investors Ethan was planning to ruin. She was no longer just fighting for her freedom. She was fighting for justice. "What do we do?" Clara asked Jessica, her voice steady for the first time in days. "We can't just go to the police. It's his word and Sophia's against mine. They'll bury us in legal fees and destroy my reputation." "You're right," Jessica agreed. "A direct assault is risky. They're prepared for that. We need to build an army. We need to find other people he's wounded." Their first call was to Eleanor Vance. As a senior board member, she had been operating on the assumption that Ethan's crime was personal. When Jessica and Clara laid out the evidence of financial fraud over a secure video call, Eleanor's expression hardened from disappointment into pure steel. "I knew his numbers seemed too good to be true," she said, her voice a low growl. "That arrogant boy. He's been defrauding his own board. He's not just a disgrace. He's a common thief." Eleanor, who had initially seen this as a PR crisis, now saw it as an existential threat to the company she had helped build. She had the power, the connections, and now the motivation to act. "I will handle the board," she declared. "You get me irrefutable proof, and I will ensure there is no golden parachute. There will only be a jail cell." Their next target was more personal. Jessica's research into Project Nightingale had uncovered large, unexplained payments to a smaller, now-defunct tech company called Innovate Dynamics. Its founder was a man named Marcus Thorne. A quick search revealed that Thorne had once been Ethan's partner. They co-founded Aura Innovations in a garage, but Thorne had been mysteriously bought out for a pittance just before the company went public, vanishing from the tech scene. They found him running a quiet coffee shop in a sleepy coastal town 3 hours from the city. He was a man haunted by the past, with weary eyes and a deep-seated bitterness. At first he refused to talk. "I signed an NDA," he said, flatly wiping down the counter. "Hayes will ruin me." "He's already ruined," Clara said, stepping forward. "You saw the video, Mr. Thorne. I'm his wife." Seeing her pregnant and resolute seemed to break through his wall of fear. He sighed, a sound of years of pent-up frustration. He called it creative accounting back then. Thorne began his story, tumbling out. He pushed me out with fabricated evidence of incompetence and threatened to blacklist me from the entire industry. He stole my algorithms, the very foundation of Aura, and left me with nothing. Jessica recorded his entire statement. Marcus Thorne was their smoking gun, the origin story of Ethan's corruption. Their alliance was growing. They now had a powerful board member from the inside and a wronged co-founder from the outside. But they needed to fracture Ethan's own team. They needed to get to Sophia. This was Clara's task. She knew Sophia wasn't motivated by love, but by ambition and greed. If she knew the ship was sinking, she would be the first one to jump into a lifeboat. Clara, using a burner phone, sent a single anonymous text to Sophia Russo. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple data file. It contained the flight details for a one-way ticket to Zurich under Ethan's name departing in 2 weeks, and a second ticket for the same flight under a false name, Isabella Rossi. There was no ticket for Sophia. The message was clear. Ethan was planning to run, and he was planning to leave her behind to take the fall. He was creating a new identity for himself, but not for her. For 2 days there was silence. Then a package arrived at Jessica's apartment via a bonded courier. It contained a single encrypted flash drive and no note. Jessica plugged it into a secure laptop. On it was everything. Copies of the offshore bank statements, emails between Sophia and Ethan detailing the fraudulent transfers, a complete ledger for Project Nightingale. Sophia had kept her own meticulous records and insurance policy. In turning over the drive, she was betting on immunity in exchange for her testimony. She had chosen self-preservation over loyalty to Ethan. The alliance was complete. Clara looked at the mountain of evidence they had assembled in less than a week. They had insiders, outsiders, and a co-conspirator who had turned state's evidence. It was an airtight case, built not just on legal strategy, but on the shared pain of everyone Ethan Hayes had ever betrayed. He built an empire by wounding people, Clara said quietly, looking at Jessica, and the evidence spread across her dining table. And now the wounded are coming to tear it down. The final act didn't play out in a dramatic courtroom showdown. It was colder, faster, and far more brutal, a corporate execution carried out with digital precision. The plan was two-pronged. While Jessica compiled the evidence into a devastating package for the district attorney's office, Eleanor Vance called a second emergency board meeting. The official reason was to vote on Ethan's formal termination. Ethan, through his lawyer, demanded to be present via video conference, confident he could bully his way into a generous severance package. It was his final fatal miscalculation. He appeared on the large screen in the boardroom, looking haggard but defiant, sitting in his sterile white home office. "This has been a regrettable week," he began, his tone arrogant. "However, my personal life has no bearing on my ability to lead this company. This board's knee-jerk reaction has already cost shareholders billions." Eleanor let him finish. Then, with ice in her veins, she said, "Mr. Hayes, this meeting is not about the events at the gala. It is about a different matter. A matter we are calling Project Nightingale." The blood drained from Ethan's face on the screen. He was momentarily speechless. Eleanor continued, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of the other board members. "We have received irrefutable evidence of a systematic multi-year fraud perpetrated by you and Ms. Sophia Russo designed to embezzle millions from this company in preparation for a fraudulent sale. We have bank statements, emails, and a full confession from your former partner, Marcus Thorne, whose intellectual property you stole to build this company." As she spoke, a file was emailed to every board member. They opened it to find the entire cache of documents from Sophia's flash drive. The silence in the room was absolute as they scrolled through the proof of his staggering betrayal. Ethan's composure finally shattered. "Lies!" he shrieked, his image pixelating as he lunged toward his camera. "This is a conspiracy. My unstable wife, is behind this. She's turning you all against me." "Your wife, Mr. Hayes," Eleanor said coolly, "is about to become the wealthiest whistleblower in this city's history. The board has already voted. You are terminated for cause. Your shares are frozen. Your contracts are null and void. Security is on their way to your residence to collect all company property. Do not resist them." Simultaneously, Jessica was sitting in the DA's office, walking the chief of the Economic Crimes Bureau through the same evidence. The DA, who had been under immense public pressure to act on the assault charge, now saw a much bigger career-making case unfold before him. Warrants were signed within the hour. Ethan's world ended not with a bang, but with a knock on the door. He was still reeling from the board meeting when two detectives from the NYPD's white-collar crime unit, accompanied by federal agents, presented him with a warrant for his arrest on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The final humiliation was exquisitely public. The man who was once the king of the city was led out of his luxury penthouse in handcuffs. The paparazzi who had been camped outside for a week hoping for a shot of Clara were there to capture it all. The images of the disgraced billionaire, his face a mask of impotent rage, were even more viral than the video of the slap. His fortress had become his prison. Sophia Russo was arrested an hour later at her lawyer's office, having already negotiated a plea deal. Months later, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Nicholas, a name with no connection to the Hayes family dynasty. The divorce was swift. Ethan, facing decades in prison, signed away everything in exchange for her agreement not to pursue further civil charges. A court-appointed receiver took over Aura Innovations, restructuring it and saving it from bankruptcy. A portion of Ethan's frozen assets, as part of a settlement, was placed in a trust for Nicholas. Clara moved out of the city. She bought a quiet house with a garden, not far from Marcus Thorne's coffee shop. She had testified before the grand jury, her voice clear and strong, and then retreated from the public eye. She had found her freedom not in the downfall of her husband, but in the reclaiming of her own voice. Her alliance of the wounded had won. Eleanor had saved her company. Marcus had received a massive settlement for his stolen work and was finally recognized as a co-founder of Aura. Jessica had become a star at the DA's office, and Clara, she had her son. She had her peace. The gilded cage was just a distant memory, a bad dream from another lifetime. She had walked through the fire and emerged not unscathed but whole. 2 years passed. The digital storm that had consumed the lives of Ethan and Clara Hayes faded into the internet's vast, ever-churning memory, becoming another cautionary tale of hubris and downfall. In a small coastal town where the scent of salt and roses hung in the air, Clara had built a life so profoundly different from her past that it felt like a story she had once read about someone else. Her world was no longer measured in carats or stock points, but in the small, sun-drenched moments that made up her days. It was the weight of her son Nicholas, now a boisterous toddler with her eyes and a fiercely independent spirit, asleep on her chest. It was the satisfaction of pulling weeds from her thriving vegetable garden, her hands stained with the rich, dark earth. It was the easy laughter shared with her friend Marcus Thorne over coffee at his now flourishing cafe, the Daily Grind, which had become the heart of the town. She had healed, but healing, she learned, was not a destination. It was a practice. There were still nights when a sudden noise would make her flinch, or a headline about corporate greed would bring a cold knot to her stomach. But the fear no longer owned her. She had a therapist she spoke with bi-weekly, who helped her untangle the complex web of trauma Ethan had woven. She was not the fragile, broken woman who had fled the gala. She was a mosaic pieced back together with stronger glue. One crisp autumn afternoon, while Nicholas napped, Clara sat on her porch swing, scrolling through the news on a tablet, a simple device a world away from the bleeding-edge tech that had once defined her life. She rarely looked for news about her past, but today an article caught her eye. It was a 2-year retrospective on the fall of Ethan Hayes. The article concisely summarized the fallout. Ethan, refusing any plea deal, had been convicted on all counts. His lack of remorse and continued insistence that he was the victim of a vast conspiracy, led by his unstable wife, had done him no favors with the judge. He was sentenced to 25 years in a federal penitentiary. The piece included a recent grainy prison photo. His charismatic smirk was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed bitterness. He was a king, dethroned, stripped of everything but his own corrosive rage. Sophia Russo, true to her nature, had fared better. Her extensive cooperation had earned her a plea deal, resulting in a 3-year sentence in a minimum security facility. She had been released 6 months ago. The article noted she was now living in obscurity under a different name, her brilliant career and reputation irrevocably destroyed. She had climbed high and fallen hard, a modern Icarus. There was also a mention of Aura Innovations. Under the steely ethical guidance of Eleanor Vance, the company had undergone a painful but necessary restructuring. Rebranded as Veritas Data, it was slowly rebuilding its reputation on a foundation of radical transparency, its very existence a testament to the failure of its founder. Clara closed the article feeling not a sense of victory or glee, but a profound, quiet peace. Their stories were over. Hers was still being written. As if summoned by her thoughts, the mail carrier pulled up. In the small bundle of letters was a familiar-looking envelope, a crisp, business-like thing that stood out from the local circulars and bills. The return address made her breath catch. USP Canaan, a federal penitentiary. It was from him. Her first instinct was a jolt of pure primal fear. Her hands trembled as she held the letter. For a fleeting moment she was back in the gilded cage. Her every move scrutinized her, every thought anticipated and controlled. She could feel his voice in her head, the smooth, venomous whisper he used before he raged. Then she looked through the screen door and saw the gentle rise and fall of her son's chest as he slept in his crib. She looked at her garden, at the sturdy tomato vines she had cultivated from seedlings. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of her own life, a life she had built with her own 2 hands. He had no power here. This was her soil, her home, her peace. He was just a ghost, a bad memory trapped behind bars and barbed wire 1,000 miles away. She walked into her kitchen without opening the letter. She turned on the gas stove, the blue flame clicking to life. She held the envelope over the burner. The corner caught, turning black, before blossoming into a bright orange flame. She watched as his name, his words, his final attempt to breach the walls of her new world turned to ash. She felt nothing but the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the gentle beating of her own steady heart. Later that evening, Jessica came to visit her sleek city car, a stark contrast to the dusty pickup trucks that lined the street. Her career had skyrocketed. She was now the head of her unit at the DA's office. But she always made time for Clara and her godson. They sat on the porch drinking wine as the sun set, painting the sky in strokes of purple and gold. Nicholas, awake and full of energy, chased fireflies on the lawn. "You seem good, Clara," Jessica said, her sharp eyes soft. "Really good." "I am," Clara replied, and she knew it was the truest thing she had ever said. "I'm thinking of starting a non-profit, a small one, helping women who are trying to leave abusive situations navigate the legal system, using some of Nicholas's trust fund for the seed money." Jessica smiled, a wide, genuine smile. "That's brilliant! You'd be amazing at it." Clara watched her son, who had just managed to catch a blinking light in his chubby hands, his face a perfect picture of wonder. The empire of Ethan Hayes, built on lies and theft, had produced nothing but ruin. But from its ashes, she had cultivated this: a life, a future, a quiet, unshakable joy. The reckoning was long over. Now it was time for the bloom. Clara's story is a powerful and stark reminder that the most pristine surfaces can hide the deepest rot. It shows us that true strength isn't about enduring abuse in silence. It's about finding the courage to speak the truth, even when your voice shakes. In a world saturated by social media, a camera phone became an unlikely weapon for justice, proving that secrets can't survive in the glare of 1,000 tiny lights. But more than that, it's a story about alliances, about how the collective strength of those who have been wronged can become an unstoppable force for change. Ethan's empire crumbled not just because of one video, but because of the web of lies he spun over years, which finally ensnared him. If you were moved by Clara's journey from a victim to a survivor, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of courage and resilience. And for more true-life dramas and incredible stories, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. What did you think of the twist involving Project Nightingale? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.